Okay. So I think as I mentioned on Tuesday and whatnot, and before, I hope I've said this before, is that we really have need to rethink young adulthood, especially with how our lifespan has increased, about the lengthening of maturity psychologically and even physically with the fully development of the brain. To consider the age about 18 to 40 as what's now being considered emerging adulthood and established adulthood. So it's this period where we find that we have all the machinery from adolescence, the physical growth, the development, and now we're emerging into kind of that, starting to consider careers, starting to consider long-lasting relationships and decision making and career choices. And then by the end of this, what we hope is that by about 40, we have some stability with independence and those kinds of things. And like I said, this can vary. I think at the beginning of the course, on average, it's the average age of about 27 is when a person is able to take care of themselves, take care of all of their bills, live independently. But there's a lot of variation. So, for example, on average, that doesn't mean everyone, but on average, women are able to establish this by about the age of 21. And on average, men are able to establish this at about the age of 34. And so hence this wide range between 18 to 40. And just like we discussed with adolescence, puberty is not just a one thing and done, it's a 4 or 5 year process. And we're finding getting into adulthood and becoming fully established isn't just it happens when you turn 18. Um, and so that's kind of what we're looking at. All right. So we have a, if you want to think about it from adolescence and whatnot, we have kind of this paradigm shift in the human timeline. Okay. Again, if we look at models before 1960, it was assumed that 18 years old, you were expected to be established in a college, considering marriage, getting a home, considering children. And between 18 to 40, this is kind of where this occurred in, okay? And it was expected to immediately start at age 18, okay? If you want an example of this, I think I'm a byproduct of this era because when I turned 18, the next day my parents had my bags packed. I was out of the house, heading to another town to work for an uncle. And there just, that was that. And the same thing occurred with my ex-wife as well. As soon as she turned 18, they said, farewell, goodbye, good luck. Um, and so, but those were kind of expectations tied to the way our families had grown and developed. Okay. But what we're finding is a shift in the human timeline, in that really 18 to 25 is really about this emerging adulthood. Okay, that early adulthood is, as it states on the slide, is no longer a monolithic block driven by economic context, education, and culturally entirely. Okay. Um, and it should be noted, and I think this is an important point, is that uh, the delay in the traditional milestone, not being able to start adulthood at 18, is showing to have an adaptive quality rather than a delay in maturation. Okay. And what I mean by that is adaptive quality, it gives the person time to develop their maturity and everything else to deal with life consequences and life situations. Okay. And the data is showing that individuals who don't have this period of emerging adulthood are more susceptible to abuse, more susceptible to poverty, more susceptible to high risk behaviors. I think it was a middle childhood period. We said one of the number one predictors of a child abuse is being born to a mother between about the age of 18 to 23. Okay. Um, and what we find is people who do not have those expectations of being an adult immediately at 18 or earlier, and it's delayed until about the age of 25 or so, they tend to be more conscientious about having children, who they get in relationships with. They tend to be more economically stable. And so it's indicating that delaying this period has a lot of benefits, not only to the individuals, but if you think about it, society as a whole. Okay. So, so let's define this emerging adulthood period. Okay. I we these sound probably familiar to the adolescents, but one of the things that adolescents aren't um, privy to then when you turn around 18 to 25 is a much broader world. Okay, we're out of the high school zeitgeist, we're out of the family system and whatnot, and we're in kind of this more broader society where our ideas and our identity are not being immediately rewarded or unrewarded by our immediate peer groups. Okay, so we find that this they go through an identity exploration. We're focusing mainly on careers and relationships, and but also developing personal values. Okay, during this age group is where we will see, for example, young people diverging from parental norms. So we find that it's during this age group that individuals who were raised to think that LGBTQ is evil and transgender is evil and awful, this is a period where a young person actually reestablishes because of their experience, whether that is healthy or not, and they change their values from their traditional family view. On that same note, because it's kind of a um, important point to make, is it also includes individuals who may have a liberal perspective on life, and they might find personal values within the conservative zeitgeist. Okay, an example of this is how successful in the last presidential election that the Republican Party and was able to persuade so many young men between the age of 18 to 25 to switch their voting, which has been traditionally Democrat, to Republican. And it's because of this identity exploration. We've mentioned this before that young men, especially, are going through instability in relationships and in where they belong in the family system and all of those kinds of things. And they feel torn between what their traditional values are and what the world is demanding of them right now. And then if you think about the conservative values are of traditional values of getting back to, man being a man, quote unquote, and being the head of their household, in charge of their relationship. that can become very appealing to young people who tend to be confused about or differentiated about the kind of maybe liberal values that they had been raised with. Okay, so just want to point how that can go both ways. It's not always what whether your view is liberal or conservative. You can be pushed either way during this age group. Okay. Instability characterized by frequent changes in jobs, housing arrangements, and romantic partners. Okay. And this tends to be pretty significant during this age group, especially in developed countries like the United States, where mobility is highly available, where employment can be diversely found, that really finding that right place and that right employment is something that the age group can do. Self-focused, free of long-term obligations, other intensely building foundations for the future. So this is the idea that that this emerging adulthood seems to be more about self-development and who I am in this world rather than looking at the long-term consequences of, say, my choices. So long-term consequences of, am I going to get married? Am I going to have a long-term job? Am I going to do this? It's more about being more self-focused in figuring out who I am as a human being. Filling in between, 60% of 18 to 25 years old answer yes and no when asked if they feel like they're a true adult. Noting that this is kind of a conflict, this idea that yes, I am, but I very much feel like I'm still developing and growing. Okay. And it's the age of possibility. It's a period of high optimism where life's overarching trajectories remain untested. Okay. And so it's kind of the age of possibilities, if you want to think about it that way. Okay. The other part of this is that we have a physical paradox. Okay. In that um, uh, that that really our ultimate how do you say physical abilities are around the age of 25 to about 35 to 40. Okay. That's when our frontal cortex has fully developed and it's completely come online. It is our peak of physical fitness and cardiac function, as this brings out. And this is where fluid intelligence reaches its absolute peak. Remember that fluid intelligence is the ability to take in new information and change your mind based upon that new information. Okay. However, why this is called a paradox is while this is the period of ultimate um, um, uh, physical fitness, this is also the period where we tend to engage in some of the more high risk behaviors. Okay. So this is where, in a sense, why you might not feel like you're the physically fit, ultimate human being during this period might have to do with lifestyle. Okay. So we see that, for example, obesity is 70.7% of US adults are overweight, and about 40%, if we round it up, would be considered obese. Okay. Substance use peaks during these years. We find that 38% of students engage in things like binge drinking. And mortality, for example, the top causes of death are strictly behavioral. Okay, and the top kind of deaths during this period are accidents, homicides, and suicides. So very behavioral. They don't take a disease state, as you would say. Okay, it's not a disease that causes the death, it's behaviors of the person. All right. So this is kind of why this is called the paradox of physical ability. Okay. I should say that there's some good news on some of the substance abuse use. And I think it's kind of a paradox in and of itself, is we are finding that greater than 52% of people during this age group are not drinking at the same rates as previous generations. So it seems like experience with maybe mom and dad and alcoholism and stuff like that has really changed the landscape for alcohol. On the other side of that, though, is we've seen increases in other types of substance abuse. The most prevalent is things like cannabis, especially in legalized states. But we also see increases in other types of medications and whatnot. So while we're seeing great decreases in one area, we're seeing very much upticks in some of the other areas of substance use. So one of the things that we should note is that what we really see at the age of 25 is the shift to what is called post-formal thought. Okay. When we look at the adolescent mind, we see that they often think in the absolute nature, wrong, right or wrong. Think purely rigidly dichotomies, right or wrong, bad and good, and believe that there's only one correct answer. Okay. However, as we transition, especially when that prefrontal cortex up to the age of 25 starts to develop, we see a shift in logic, okay, where we have a thesis, an antithesis, and our goal is to synthesize those two things. So we have probably a good example of this is the idea that people in jail are bad people, people not in jail are good people. Okay. And kind of the antithesis of this is when a cop gets arrested for doing something wrong. Or we hear about abuse among religious leaders. Okay. And so here we have this contradiction. So we have to make a synthesis. Another example of this is when I worked in the women's prison, there were people there that were there for legitimate bad reasons, but they also had very positive qualities. Okay. When I observed a lot of the inmates during visitation, they were amazing mothers. There were accountants who did other inmates' taxes. There were amazing people who made amazing art. Uh, and so this contradiction that someone is purely bad, thesis, someone who goes to prison is bad. Antithesis, people who in prison are there because of the situation. You have to, an adult mind makes a synthesis that good people can do bad things and bad people can be good people. Okay. Um, and so some of the parts of this, though, is what is known as the relative in nature integration of opposing ideas and acceptance of ambiguity that makes context dependent decision based on experience. And the thing that I want to note is the relativistic nature of post-formal thought. Okay. In that you probably heard the term everything is relative. Okay. Meaning that everything is relative to the situation you're in. Okay. So post-formal thought, in order to change one's mind, needs a change in the relative input that they're receiving. Okay. So for example, if an individual is raised in a closed community, let's say a very small town, and they don't move around much and they don't have much interaction with other types of people and those kinds of things, they may reach post-formal thought, but that post-formal thought will be relative to their experiences and knowledge that they have now. Okay, so that's why, for example, you find a higher level of prejudices in areas like the Midwest and the North mid areas of the country, where the interaction between people goes from 100 to 1,000 within a square mile to maybe 25 to 50. Okay. And this has been shown then that it's really difficult to change one's mind. It's easy to post-formally justify your thoughts rather than change your thoughts. Okay. And this is why, again, during this age group, things like diversity become important. Things like traveling among this age group has become a very important aspect of this developmental period, because what that is doing is it's allowing this very uh, amicable brain that you have now to explore different ideas and different ways of being and existing. So now that this is more considered a more of an emerging adulthood, we find a lot of young adults in this age group do a lot more travel. They do a lot more interact with a lot more diverse type of people instead of staying with their own group and those kinds of things, because this is kind of what the brain is drawing to. And if you have the resources and the ability, that's what we find young people right now doing. All right. I do want to talk about the higher education equation because it also is a paradox in and of itself. You probably heard that over 80% of employers rate degree holders at higher worth. You probably seen the college um, um, uh, advertisement has come to college and you'll earn more money. Um, but let's look at the liability side of that. So we know that they'll have higher life income trajectories, greater long-term social competencies, and less dogmatic thinking and higher civic engagement. So all pretty good benefits, I would say. But some of the liabilities that often come with it is 65% of graduating seniors carry student debt. 28, 20, the average undergraduate debt is around 28,650. But I will tell you that this has a very wide range. For example, an analysis done here in the state of Arizona is unless you had additional help from family and friends and or spouses, the average undergraduate debt for an Arizonian is around 56,000. Okay. Um, and again, going into school graduate, it says 42,000 more for masters and professionals. But again, if it's a first generational who tend to not get as much support from home and stuff like this actually jumps to over $80,000 for a master's degree and over 160,000 for a professional or doctorate degree. So dependent upon the person and their social support and whether they're first generational or second generational, the debt really increases or is dependent upon that. Uh, there's about a 30% default rate for profit institutions. Well, what this is saying is that if you go to a for-profit university, so for example, Grand Canyon University, some online ones include Walden University, University of Phoenix, are all for profit. They have about a 30% default rate, meaning that 30% of their borrowers go into default because they can't pay back their student loans. And then 4% of public institutions, and that has to do with cost. You'll pay about 2 to 3 times more going to a private institution than a public institution. Okay. What I would encourage you to do with your higher education, just from this perspective and living through it, and to let all of you know where I came from in my education, I was not only a first generational college student, I was a first generational high school graduate. I am I am the first in my family to get a doctorate degree going clear back to records into the 1800s. My son is the second. Um, and I was raised in poverty. Okay. The story of when my mom was pregnant with me is that for dinners, they lived in St. George. They would go for walks and neighbor trees that had walnuts on. They would pick walnuts, and that's what they had for dinner. From the age of 0 to 6, I moved 36 different times. And my second grade teacher actually wrote on a report card once that told my parents to prepare me for trade because I wasn't going to graduate from high school. Okay. That's where I came from. And the reason why I tell you this story is to express my life after college because I ended up, because of my situation, I do have a lot of college debt. I won't deny that. And so on average, I probably, if you minus my school loans each year, make not much more than my brother who paints cars and my older brother who works in grocery stores as a manager. I don't make, in fact, the grocery store manager makes more than I do. But the difference between me and my brothers, even though income wise, I'm not doing much better because of school debt. The difference between me and my brothers is I get to get up every single day and do what I want to do, not what I can get employed to do or what I'm forced to do. Okay. And so, one of the things that I would encourage everyone to think about while you're going through your college degree is the quality of life that a college degree can give you. You will have more financial stability because you'll be in a career you want to be in and therefore want to stay with an employer or stay with what you're doing because your identity isn't about being an employee at Walmart. It's about being a psychologist. It's about being an engineer. It's about being a social worker. Your identity will no longer be tied to an employer. It is yours. And that makes you more employable and more able to be more independent than someone who their identity is I work at Walmart, or I shouldn't say Walmart, it's not a bad place to work at, but work at Walmart or McDonald's or go to a construction site each day if you didn't have any other choices. Okay. So that's something to think about with your education. And that's why I also encourage you to take your general education seriously. Um, the average person that is successful at graduating college and being where they want to be after college change their major on an average of 5 to 7 times. Okay. Reason being is general education allows you to explore things like literature, mathematics, science, social sciences, writing. Here at TOCC, Tohono O'odham history and Tohono O'odham language. You get to explore all of these areas. And one of these days, you'll be sitting in a class and you're going to go, and it's going to snap just like this. And it's going to go, this is where I belong. Or it's going to say, if you're already in that area that you're interested in, you're going to go, this is the right place for me. Okay. And that then, again, that leads to a much happier life. I'm just going to say that. Okay. So those are some things to consider and what we find in psychology um, that really uh, is the benefit of higher education, getting up and doing what you want to do every day instead of what the economy employs you for. Okay. Navigating the modern work world is also a thing that traditionally wasn't something that you really had to really invest in. Okay. And I'll give an example of this. When again, when I grad when I went when I said I was going to start college, my family was very upset. Okay. At the time, I'd been working in convenience stores and grocery stores and all of these kinds of things. And so my family came to me and said, Curtis, if you decide not to go to college, I'll help you get, I think it was an assistant manager job at a local convenience store. And they would help me with a down payment on a trailer house. Okay. If I didn't go to college. And that's kind of how it was. And that's kind of a negative example. But back before our modern technology communication era, really your employment was very well established by your local community, your family, the connections that they have, and you were pretty much set on a career path based upon your family. Okay. However, what we're finding is this is much more complicated for those in earlier emerging adulthood. Okay. Because we have so many more options and less stability in the workplace. Okay. Um, we should note just some things dealing with millennials and Gen Z, as this is currently the largest generation in the labor force currently, but only 29% being engaged at work. All right, so let me kind of break that down. Is that this is the largest number of individuals that have the potential to be in the workforce and to be employed, but only about a third, 29%, actually engage in retaining active employment or being active in the workforce. Okay. And it really has been due to a fundamental economic shift, is that younger people are looking more for what is my purpose rather than what is my paycheck. Okay. So it's less about earning and more about where do I belong. Okay. And so we have a lot of job hopping during this group. Really, it's about finding your purpose. And we've also found, and you could probably, I see this on TikTok and Instagram all the time, this idea of a gig economy, where you piecemeal all of these things that you could do to make money. Okay. Um, and what we find is that individuals tend to go into a couple paths. One is we get through this period of 18 to 25, and we find that a lot of individuals who kind of have not stabilized go through retraining, back to school, and they pivot towards a long-term career. Okay. But what we find after this, and what is called the net phenomenon, is neither employed nor education or training. 13% of the US 15 to 29-year-olds fall into this net gap. Okay. And they're at high risk for permanent economic detachment without systematic interventions. So this is where systems and families tend to need to provide support for this other group of young people coming into later middle adulthood. Okay. We're going to skip this one for now. So the one thing that, again, at the beginning of this lecture, we talked about is this idea of identity and the evolving self, okay? And the thing that has been recognized is that there's a shift between emerging and young adulthood. So between that 18 to 25 to 26 to 40, okay? Is that what we find is that between 18 to 25 we see this decreasing of narcissism and openness. Okay, so let me talk about that for just a minute, because one is kind of a negative trait and the other is actually shown to have correlated with positive outcomes. So narcissism is this egocentrism taken to the next level. I'm the only one that is important. Life is about me. Take advantage of other people. The kind of that narcissistic perspective. Okay, the world is here for my pleasure. We find that it becomes, it lowers to a significant level by about the age of 25. But this is when we find that it intersects with this increasing conscientiousness. So let's get to conscientiousness first. Conscientiousness is your understanding of your impact of behaviors on other people. Okay. You can think of someone who is high in conscientiousness is the person who says, "Excuse me," if they bump into you, or they ask, did I explain this right for you? Do you understand what I'm trying to explain? Or the person who takes the time and says, hey, I'm sorry, I buzzed off for a minute. Can you tell me what you were saying again? It's that person that understands that their behavior and their state has an influence on others. Okay. We find that when narcissism is at its most goes down, conscientiousness is going up to where it's about around the age of 40. We tend to be more conscientious at a higher level and less narcissistic. Okay. Openness is on the scale, it goes from openness to closeness. And this has to do with our fluid intelligence. Okay. People are more open when they're willing to accept new information and change their mind, as explained earlier. Closeness is this idea of stable knowledge, that there are certain knowledge that is fixed and impure, in not, you can't penetrate and change. Okay. So this is why we find that individuals between 26 to 40, um, if they have a solid, let's say, Christian belief, it tends to become less and less likely that they'll change that belief system, okay? Or gender and sexuality is another good example. By the age of 26, if the individual has a solid kind of a hardened idea of what gender is, they're less likely to change their mind based on new information. Okay. So while we're becoming more conscientious, we're becoming less likely to change our beliefs and attitudes. Okay. Um, but it is because of this cross section of this expanded adulthood between the age of 18 to 25, where we're seeing the evolving landscape of things like gender. because of this period between 18 to 25, where belief systems can easily be changed and attitudes can easily be changed. This is why we're getting a lot of the shifts. Well, this is what they think. Nothing's for sure, that society is shifting to more one with a gender example, why we're being this young group is being more and more accepting of things like binary frameworks, rising visibility of cisgender and transgender and age and gender as a whole. Okay. um, there is something though that's called the minority stress model, and this is unaccepting of environments create a chronic external internal stress. Okay. And this systematic, and I'm reading now, this systematic pressure caused significantly higher anxiety and depression rates among gender non-conforming adults. Okay. And so what this minority stress model is this idea that with continued environmental stress and harm, that even when outside of this environment, we can, often people in minority groups can experience higher levels of anxiety and depression, even when they're in an accepting environment. Okay. So this kind of and so what has been more significant about the younger age group is this sensitivity to minority stress, this increased awareness that being uh, prejudiced or discriminatory based on a person's gender or a person's ethnicity can cause these internal mechanisms. What we find in this is it Gen Z and Gen something group, this 18 to 25 group, is that they've tried to reduce the minority stress that they go through and becoming more acceptable. So, to help maybe decrease that high anxiety and depression that are experienced later. Okay. We talked about we talked about child attachment, I think in infancy or early childhood. And so I want to talk about the kind of this what's called blueprint for attachment. Okay. So, and first we need to look at this insight that is at the bottom of the slide where it says early childhood attachment is probabilistic, not deterministic. Security is culminated in a person's attachment history, capable of changing through corrective adult relationships. What this insight is stating is that your early attachments in childhood are not as predictive as your adult attachment if it's not taken in the context of your adolescent history, your early adult uh, emerging adulthood experiences and the like, and any significant change or traumas that come into a person's life. Okay. So, what we find is in adulthood, based on that combination of adolescence and peer relationships, middle adulthood relationships, and that early, is we tend to get this blueprint going into adult attachment. Okay. Where, again, on this y axis, we have attachment related to anxiety. And this on the x-axis, avoidance. So you remember when we talked about uh, uh, Carl Rogers, and we said there's two types of intimacy isolation. Avoidance, I think is what we called it. And if you remember, there were the ones that avoided, right? There was the ones that didn't engage in relationships because but instead they invested into non-human relationship things. So this explained the workaholic person obsessed with their vehicles, those kinds of things. Okay, the stereotypical cat woman and dog man. Okay, and then on the other side, and so this would be the avoidant x-axis, right? On the other side, we have anxiety. So if you remember, put in the simple terms when we talked about Carl Rogers, this is a person that wanted a relationship really bad, so they'd get into it, but then they would start having anxiety as the relationship started to become more and more real, and so they often would leave the relationship. Okay. This is a refinement because we're going to put avoidance on one axis and anxiety on the other. And of course, if we're low on anxiety and low on avoidance, we're comfortable trusting we can depend on our partner. That emotional security. Okay. However, if we're high on both, we're that fearful avoidant. So we desire close but deeply distrust others and fear rejection. So in that Carl Rogers one, this is a person who will avoid close relationships even though they want it, but they'll invest in some non-human entity. Okay. And so what about high anxiety but low avoidance? Okay. This is what's known as a preoccupied because they're so fearful of losing the person, but because they don't want to avoid the relationship, this is person who deeply fears things like abandonment and are very prone to jealousy. Okay. And then, but what if we're high avoidant, but we're low on anxiety? We're uncomfortable with dependency. We actively dismisses the importance of emotional closeness. So this is a person who is emotionally distant in a relationship. Okay. And so our accumulation up to emerging adulthood sets us for these adult attachment styles. With that being said, yes, they can be changed. Are they harder to change in adulthood than in early and adolescence? Yes, they are. And so, but they are changeable. And then we can think of, so what about, again, when we used to talk about young adulthood, I used to start with this notion that individuals, men think about this, men over the age of 20 think about this about every 90 seconds. Women think about this about every 2 to 3 hours. And I'd always get these answers that I think you guys are funny with, like, oh, they're thinking about jobs, they're thinking about what they're going to do with their friends and all this kind of stuff. And the actual answer is sex. Okay. And it was made kind of as a joking thing to show that young adulthood is really about finding that person that you can establish a home and a family with. Okay. Um, and it's interesting because we've come to this point of what's known as more of the modern courtship funnel, okay, where we've come to this what's considered people who are not ready for a relationship to people who are looking for commitment. And it's a funnel because we're finding that people tend to want to get down to the bottom of the funnel eventually, but it also is represented by the cone of the more people that are out there. So, I hear a lot of times, why can't I find a good guy at my age? Well, I hope this graph explains it. If you think about the individuals who are actually actively seeking a committed relationship, they're far outnumbered by the individuals who are not in this current culture that we're in. a good portion of young people tend to look at the hookup culture, which is an uncommitted sexual encounter. In fact, 70% of people between the age of 12 to 21 report participating in the hookup culture idea. And then we have another larger group that is the FWB group, which looks for casual intimacy integrated with friendship. We find that when we survey undergraduate college students, about 60% fall under this group, at least in at those who go to college. And then we have the online dating logarithms that try to hook you up with the perfect mate. And we find that 1 in 5 emerging adults use dating apps, produces couples with vastly more racial and ethnic diversity than offline dating that we find. Um, but the use of that dating app tends to either swing towards the hookup culture and the friends with benefits, or the next level, which is commitment. Okay. Uh, on the commitment is this is I'm looking for a relationship that is going to be long term. Okay. The paradox of this culture, again, on this right hand, is that when we talk to individuals in the hookup culture and the friend with benefit cultures, about 65% of women and 45% of men hope still that that hookup or that casual encounter with a friend may evolve into a committed relationship. So it's kind of a paradox because this is what the individuals within these cultural contexts say they want, but when they measure it confidentially on a confidential survey, about 65% and 60 of women and 45% of men write their true intent is to hope that that can turn into something committed. Okay. The other thing that we'll kind of end with today here is what's called the shift in milestones. It used to be that the goal was to become married and um, committed to someone. What we see today is both delays in marriages and the rise of cohabitation. So, the average age for the first marriage in, for example, the 1960s was 20 for females, 23 for males. To currently, the average age for marriage is 26.5 for females and 29 for males. Okay. Um, and this was in 2010. Okay. So what this is indicating is marriage is not the starting line for adulthood. There's other things that need committed to before this can occur. And we should note that some tertiary evidence suggests that marriage is becoming less and less important to even people above 27, 29 years of age. In fact, we find that currently 40% of children born to women at the age of 30 are born, I don't want to use this term, fatherless, um, without the uh, um, man's involvement, other than that first kind of conception period. And now you might think, well, that's because men are not involved in relationships, don't want to be dads or anything else. But the majority of that 40% of women are actually saying they wanted to have a child of their own. They really never had an intention of a father being involved. So There is that portion where the man just leaves, but that's actually from current data is more of a stereotype than it is an actual uh, data collected information. And this is coming from women who are having these children. Okay. And you'll also note by this graph that around 2008, 2005, the number of people living with parents has exceeded the number of individuals getting married to a spouse. So these aren't individuals who are living on their own. And I want to make this very clear. This is individuals who are living with a supportive other. Okay. Um, and what we have found is that instead of finding that initial partner and spouse, more and more individuals are deciding I'm just going to stay at home and live with parents. Okay, and so we have an inverse into compared if we want to compare the 1880s to present times. Okay. All right. What do we need to finish? We can do that later. All right. I think the rest of that we can